The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. It is one of the most coveted trophies in the world, but are gold medals really gold? Well, mostly, they're not. The gold medals given out these days are nearly entirely silver and are plated with pure gold to give them that iconic sheen. Silver medals are, of course, made with silver, and bronze medals are a combination of copper and other metals like tin or zinc. And while winning an Olympic medal is priceless, the value of the materials in the medal are not. In recent games, some of the materials used to make the medals have come from recycled cell phones. Mass Mutual celebrates women's sports history and understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and two big pieces of the long-term driver market puzzle have slotted into place, with Lando Norris for McLaren and Charles Leclerc for Ferrari committing to new long-term deals. But why have they dedicated their futures to their current teams, and what does it mean for their employers? I'm Edd Straw, and joining us to tell all is Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Scott, you're always on point when it comes to news stories. This one was a little bit of a surprise, wasn't it?
A little bit, yeah. Obviously, we are in a position where we've got quite a volatile driver market coming up, I think, over this year and probably across 25 as well. It kind of spans 2 seasons, really, with the way that contracts are expiring, or maybe I should say were expiring, because while you have a Ferrari announcement of a Charles Leclerc contract renewal was quite out of the blue in terms of it's, wasn't teased or anything like that, but very much expected, right? Like, we've been expecting that for weeks and weeks, if not months. I remember, I think it was in Austria last year was when it really sounded very firm that Leclerc wanted to stay at Ferrari and would be doing a new deal. It was just a matter of when. But the Norris one, yeah, a little bit more out of the blue, because not because it's the opposite situation to Leclerc, not because we thought he might be scratching at the door a little bit, trying to get out of McLaren, certainly not the way they ended last season, but because his existing deal didn't expire until the end of 2025. He had time. And he could have waited, he could have played the field a little bit more, but as I'm sure we're about to get into, that wasn't something he wanted to entertain. He's quite happy to get it done early. What would you be, Ed? If you were an F1 driver in your pomp, or with years ahead of you, are you a sit tight and maybe be part of the driver market drama, or are you a get your ducks in a row early and then be able to crack on with the plan?
I think it's always to get pen on paper, isn't it? If you're in the right place, that's the key thing. But yeah, nice long-term stability is always good. That always means you're a little bit more in control of what's going on. So that's what I favour. So I can understand why Norris quite enjoys that sort of thing. But let's just lay out what we know about this new deal and his reasons for committing. And you, of course, have heard from Lando Norris not long before this podcast. Yeah,
I heard from Lando Norris, Zach Brown and Andrea Stella. So all the key figures in this deal. So it's a multi-year long-term extension. It's been characterised by Zach Brown as an extension. So I think it's existing contract, presumably on the new terms, runs to the end of 25, and I would imagine there's got to be at least 2 years on top of that. I'd be very surprised if this ends before 27, but the reason I can't be more specific is because McLaren won't tell us. It's the same with Ferrari and Leclerc, where they announce several seasons but don't say until when, which is maybe some people think is not that surprising, but it is actually. When Norris did his last McLaren deal, which was February 2022, I think, we knew it ran until the end of 2025, and we knew it didn't have any break clauses because they were explicit about that. They wanted to get ahead of that. When Oscar Piastri signed his new long-term McLaren contract last year, we knew, and still know obviously, that runs until the end of 2026. But we don't know how long Norris's deal runs for, and that's why I asked Zach Brown why the secrecy when there wasn't before, and he initially tried to shrug it off a little bit, sort of joked and said it's because it's our business. But Norris's last deal was their business too. Piastri's deal was their business too, and we knew the details there. So there will be a reason why. I mean, I know you just asked and said about the rationale for Norris signing this deal, but just before we get on to that, just a quick tangent on this, Ed. How do you feel about because for me it feels a bit like secrecy for the sake of secrecy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're businesses, so they're not obliged to disclose this, but I actually think at a time when sports in general are trying to give more to fans and their big talking points, I don't see any reason not to, because everybody who matters will find out, shall we say, in terms of driver managers, and everybody talks. So it's not like any rival teams are going to be given any extra information, really, because they'll know very quickly, because there's people whose whole job is to work the driver market. And if you're a driver manager, even if your driver's signed up for the long haul, you are still doing all that, making sure you know where everything is. And if you're a team boss, even if your driver lineup signed up for the long term, you're keeping a very close eye on where the chess pieces are, where they might move. So I actually don't. I don't think there's any particular need for the secrecy. They don't need to release the contracts or anything, but just things like duration is quite an important thing, I think, for the general peripheral storylines of Formula One. So I don't see why they shouldn't be a bit more open about it. If they don't have to be, though, why not? Well,
the thing is, for me, it's you don't lose anything. That's what I find so strange. You don't lose anything by saying when it runs until. And if anything, you cause yourself more problems because you have people doing exactly what we're doing now, right? Where you're speculating on, is there a reason behind this? And I think there are. Like, there will be a reason why they told us when Norris's last deal ran to, and they've told us when Piastri's deal runs to, but they won't tell us when this runs to. And I think there are two reasons why that would be. One, it's either that Norris hasn't signed up for as long as he did before, so he hasn't done another 4-year deal, and McLaren doesn't want there to be too much focus on why he's only done a 3-year deal when last time it was 4 years, or it'll be something to do with break clauses, because as I say, first, the last time Norris did a long-term McLaren extension, we were told he didn't have a break clause, and I understand that. I get that he didn't feel that he needed one in that moment, but the circumstances are different now. He's a bit older. Sooner or later there will be other teams, and there have been teams sniffing around for him. So I'd be surprised if this deal has been done without an option somewhere, like performance related or whatever. So maybe, and it'll be the same for Leclerc. I'm sure there'll be a reason why Ferrari's decided to break from convention, because Zach Brown can laugh and say this is the way it normally works, and actually by telling you everything last time that was a bit different. No, we do normally know when contracts run until, and there'll be a reason why that isn't the case, and I'm sure it'll be because there's something about the contract that they don't want us to know. They're not, and I don't mean that, it obviously sounds quite obvious because they're hiding it. What I mean is that there's something about it that it's in their interest to keep that hidden. And that can only relate to the duration's not as long as people maybe expect it to be or whatever, something like that. Or because there's a break clause in it that means they want to say he's definitely going to be with us until X, but they can't say that because there's a break clause. So it just suits them to just say it's a multi-year deal.
Yeah, and of course you can have option-based things as well. There can be options on either side. They can be based on certain things. The team can have an option on the driver if certain performance levels have been achieved by the team, etc., as well as, shall we say, these outright break clauses. But admittedly, those more emphatic break clauses by which it says, right, you are free to leave this contract if this doesn't happen, those are the things they want to keep a bit more quiet, because that's a bit trickier to find out. Because normally, if you're dealing with a driver, you'll kind of have to believe what they tell you on the contract. I mean, when it comes time to sign, then they probably need to show you something to make it clear. But that's kind of where the uncertainty is. But it seems fair to assume, because he was, as you say, contracted to 25, so the contract duration in one way, shape or form, the total span, whether that's some years as options or whatever, is presumably a chunk longer. I think it's fair to assume that. It's just a question of how long that total span is and how secure the back end of those total spans are. And I'll just throw in one other little general fact. I don't know the details of this contract, but generally, when we talk about the value of contracts, the payments tend to be backloaded by way of a bit of a loyalty thing. So you might have a deal that's X amount of money, but it'll be 6 million one year, 7 million the next year, 8 million the next year, just to kind of engineer in a little bit of that. So I just thought I'd throw that in as a bit of a tangential fact. But we can assume Norris has got something for a reasonably long duration, even if it's not as far forward as, say, Leclerc's is rumoured to be at 2029.
Yeah, so Leclerc's rumoured to be until 2029, but I reckon Lando's is probably my gut feeling, and I say this, I don't know. My gut feeling is that this contract's going to run until the end of 2027 at the earliest. I think it'll be fixed until the end of 27, maybe 2028, and there'll be an option beyond that. It'll either be an option or a break clause, because you can have it both ways, can't you? You can either have the contract already exists to run until, like, let's say Leclerc's, for example, the way it was speculated over the winter is the contract runs until 2029, but he has a break clause after the third year, so at the end of 2027. But it could also be, you could also do it the other way around, where you do a 3-year contract with an option on the driver's side for an additional 1 or 2. And my suspicion is that Norris has a similar kind of mechanism. He either has an option or a break. The reason I suspect that is because he's in a slightly different phase of his career now. So, and in explaining this, I can answer the question that you asked me a few minutes ago, Ed. He's very loyal to McLaren. He really wants, it's the same as Leclerc with Ferrari. He wants to win with this team. There's a degree of loyalty and gratitude and a great deal of affection and sentiment from Norris towards McLaren, and in the other direction as well, of course. So he is looking for reasons to stay most of the time. And when you have a team that's on an upward trajectory again, on track, like they were in the second half of 2023, he really likes what Andrea Stella's done with the team. I think I can imagine as a driver, Stella's an absolutely fantastic team principal to work under. He's felt that there's an atmosphere within McLaren that hasn't existed on that level before, because they were achieving so much more with what they already had last year. And now they've added the wind tunnel and simulator that they've been working on the car since September last year with. They've brought in David Sanchez and Rob Marshall from Ferrari and Red Bull respectively. So there's this real momentum around McLaren again, which didn't exist 12 months ago, 18 months ago. So Norris has kind of gone, okay, well, they're convincing me on track again. They're convincing me off track. I want to be here. There's a big rules change coming up in 2026, which we all need to be focused on. And I've got opportunities this year and next year, because I really believe we're going to be in a strong position to fight for wins and keep this upward curve going. He knows that it's very, very important as the lead driver to buy into that and be seen as part of that project. And I do understand why people get frustrated at drivers committing sort of longer term and taking themselves out of the fun of the driver market and whatnot. But Norris has no interest in being part of that speculation. He admitted he quite enjoys it when he sees himself linked with Red Bull. He finds it quite funny what people write about him and stuff like that. But he knows that from a team point of view, that's probably a bad thing, because you don't want your rank and file workers, the people on the day-to-day basis that are basically making the difference between whether you have a competitive car or not, to be wondering whether or not your driver's leaving. So he wanted to nip that in the bud. That was one of the motivations for doing it. And he sets a course now for him and McLaren to work towards. They can focus on 24, they can focus on 25, they can focus on the new regs in 26 and hitting that as hard as they possibly can without there being a question mark hanging over everyone's heads, which is Lando going to leave? Is a Red Bull going to come in for him? Can Red Bull come in for him? That is all taken off the table by this deal. And I get it. To me, it makes a lot of sense, because he's not got a better alternative right now. The way McLaren ended last season, I don't see that as being any worse an option in the medium term than Ferrari or Mercedes. And if he goes into Red Bull, he's going to go there as Max Verstappen's teammate, and I don't think he's going to get a straight shot against Verstappen. Whether Red Bull would even want to hire him because of the potential for two alphas in the same team causing a bunch of problems. So I totally get why he is in this and has decided to go all in on this.
Yeah, and it's good as well because taking any question marks about his future as far as the people in the team are concerned is important, because we've talked about the potential for this Piastri versus Norris battle as Piastri builds on his promising first season. So it's useful when it comes to that as well.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right, you could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast. Easier said, done. Let's quickly consider the wider implications of this, Scott. We talked a few weeks ago about predicting the driver market. That was for 2025, but we talked about all sorts of factors. We did say that barring a lightning bolt, Norris would be there in 25 because he's contracted anyway. But what do you make of the impacts on the rest of the world? There'll be a few drivers who might be looking at that Norris deal thinking, sort of starting to think how McLaren could fit into options, certainly for 26. So it's a funny one, isn't it? It's significant. It's not seismic, but there's an effect there.
Well, I'll almost throw it back at you straight away, Ed, which is that linking it to the other news we've had this week, it's immediately a potential port in a storm taken away from Carlos Sainz, isn't it? We were having this conversation, I think it was last night, as we see him record this now, where because we were thinking about the driver market implications and we were working on some content around the kind of dilemmas with the driver market, because Leclerc has that was such it was barely the first domino, Leclerc at Ferrari, wasn't it? Because we just knew it was coming, but it's the second part of Ferrari that is the question mark, which is what does Carlos Sainz do? And one of the things we talked about was, well, actually, going back to McLaren would presumably potentially be an option depending on what happened there. If you're Alex Albon, for example, looking for a way out of Williams, if Sainz is renewed at Ferrari, I bet McLaren and Aston Martin are very high on his want list. That's not an option now. So McLaren's driver lineup's locked in until the end of 2026 with Norris and Piastri. So it takes away a plum seat, doesn't it, in the driver market? And you'd have to say it wasn't the most sought after seat, because obviously Red Bull is probably your number one target destination. But what do you think? Would a driver look at a McLaren seat now as coveted as a Mercedes or even a Ferrari seat?
It's not too far off. I think when you're talking about something for 26, it's all part of the equation, isn't it? Because you're always, the chessboard's always moving in the driver market. So it's all about how that might have a knock-on effect. And for example, one thing I think it does have an impact on, you mentioned Carlos Sainz. It also, I think, fractionally weakens his position if he wants to say okay, I'll take a short-term Ferrari deal, maybe a 1+1 or something, because he could think, well, there might be a McLaren opportunity in 26. But now, unless something happens unexpected, that's less likely now. So it just slightly shifts that equation. It's not like the predominant number in that equation or anything, but it's just part of it. So it's sort of all part of the whole landscape, and that's what this game is. It's not so much drivers say, right, that's definitely the seat I'm definitely going to get. It's all about kind of judging how things balance, and then it has an impact on your negotiations as well, because if you're negotiating with someone, as Sainz is with Ferrari, they know what options are being narrowed, etc. And if McLaren's taken off the board for Sainz, which effectively this is for 26 rather, certainly, although Sainz's contract ends at the end of this year, I think that does have a little bit of an impact. It doesn't transform it, but just shifts things around a bit.
And it also has a massive impact on what we perceive Red Bull to be thinking about and doing, because as we talked about on the Predicting the 25 Driver Market podcast, okay, we had Norris and Piastri sticking with McLaren, but in that, we discussed, didn't we, that you couldn't rule out Red Bull trying to get Norris if he was available, if it was possible to turn his head, if for any reason the contract situation with McLaren wasn't resolved early, then it would be vulnerable to potentially events in 2024 creating an opportunity for Red Bull to go after Norris. Red Bull have constantly talked up Norris as an option, and he seemed like the kind of perfect partner for Verstappen in terms of they get on well off the track. They're both very adaptable drivers. They both like a car with a very strong front end, so technically they would seem to be quite compatible as well. But the big question mark was, do you want two alphas there? So there was this, it was just a fascinating, almost never-ending link between Red Bull and Norris, and that was never going to stop. All the while, Norris was not under contract beyond 2025 because, and I think I might have said this on that other podcast, but either McLaren would have known he was going at the end of 25, or and just have to accept that that's when they lose him, or it would have agreed a deal to let him go at the end of 2024 because they know they're going to lose him anyway, but this way they might be able to get a bit of compensation out of Red Bull or something like that. And with Sergio Perez's seat constantly being scrutinised, with Daniel Ricciardo not making an absolutely spellbinding account of himself in his cameos around his injury last season, with Yuki Tsunoda just not seemingly being top of Red Bull's list despite arguably being the best option, that Red Bull seat and who would take it if they went outside the programme it's one of the biggest talking points for 2024. Norris was a part of that, but he cannot be linked to that anymore. We joked on that podcast, didn't we, about what you'd have to pay to get Norris out of a contract ending in 2025. If this one runs until 27-28, you're looking at 150 million that McLaren would demand, I reckon. I don't think there'd be a number that Red Bull could pay to get. So Norris is off the table completely for Red Bull now.
To be fair, I almost interpret it slightly differently, and it doesn't really change it, because I don't think Red Bull could go to the number high enough really to justify McLaren doing it anyway. Maybe if you got into 25 it might, because it'd be the last year, so possibly. But I almost feel like there's still that lingering thing in the background with Norris. It might even be more easy to if there are specific performance clauses and McLaren slumps. But of course, I've got fairly high confidence that McLaren's going to keep going, because they've been so convincing in the progress they're making, the rationale, the strategic approach they're taking with it all. I'm pretty convinced that McLaren should be able to make the progress, so I suspect that'll be the most powerful thing. But yeah, it's an interesting scenario in the driver market, and there's other drivers, someone like Albon as well, because McLaren do hold Albon in reasonably high regard, so he'd have been a possibility for there. So it has a little bit of an effect on him as well. He's the same position as Sainz. He's out of contract for next season, so it didn't line up the old Norris contract and that, but still, it all has a little bit of an effect. I don't think Albon would have taken a short-term deal with anyone for 25 anyway, but this makes it even less likely, because that'll be one less desirable piece on the board. And I don't know, it probably moves Aston Martin slightly up in terms of the interest level for drivers looking at good seats. So, and maybe makes Mercedes a bit more interesting for 26, given there's obviously the everlasting questions over Hamilton, that he's kind of going contract to contract almost, with retirement talk inevitably flaring up. So there's little questions there. It's why it's funny. It's sort of, this move by Norris has calmed the driver market waters a little bit, but it's also not changed it monstrously. It's quite a funny one in that regard, but it'll certainly have a little bit of an impact on some drivers, and it's just also really good for McLaren, I think, as well, because that's a really strong driver lineup. Piastri's going to only get better this year. Norris is very, very, very good. And he's still got a little bit more room for improvement, as we've talked about before. So this is kind of dynasty building for McLaren, I think. I said they've been really strategic with everything they're doing and all the infrastructure improvements. They see drivers as really important, and they're absolutely right to, because now Formula One is a game where you don't just pick up a really good driver sort of on the hoof. You've got to be really, really long-term in your planning. And I like the fact that McLaren's not taking it for granted. They thought, right, let's do everything we can to get this in place, and all credit to them for doing that. So I imagine Zach Brown and Andrea Stella must have been quite pleased about the whole thing when you spoke to them earlier.
Yeah, they are. They obviously they recognise that Norris is a key pillar of what they're building there, the dynasty that they're putting together, as you put it, Ed. They recognise that he was absolutely key to the scale of the turnaround that they had last year, because as good as Piastri was, he wasn't able to deliver the performances on a consistent basis in the way that Norris was. What was it, 6 second places and a third place and a couple of sprint podiums, a sprint pole for Norris. He put so much gloss on that turnaround for McLaren last year and made it just, he showed exactly how much McLaren had turned it around. And when you have the buy-in of a top driver, it does make such a big difference to a project, because everybody in the team can see what they're working towards. There's no suggestion of, our driver thinks he's too good for us now, or our driver's looking for a way out, or even not even antagonistically towards the driver, but just an element of, oh God, now we've lost him as well because he's going. They know that they have the strongest individual parts all coming together. So it's very important. I don't massively like the term. I've used it a few times, but we've often heard, and Zach Brown is one of the people who uses this, we've often heard the terms franchise driver thrown around quite a lot in the last few years, and you can see it. Lewis Hamilton is that for Mercedes, Max Verstappen is that for Red Bull, Leclerc and Norris are that for Ferrari and McLaren, and Piastri might be that as well, because I think McLaren have got a very good driver lineup in the long term. But you need buy-in from your biggest individuals, and when you have Mercedes sort of did it fairly recently in Toto Wolff and James Allison signing new long-term contracts. It's about the message that it sends to the whole organisation about what they're doing to sponsors, to different partners, and it'll be the same with this. You can't. It's not just about, oh, this means that McLaren will probably get some better results on track in the next few years. It's about the broader sort of vision and actually putting that vision into practice. It's got symbolic value, but it also has a tangible impact and effect on the organisation as a whole.
Yeah, and I think it's positive that McLaren don't just have one driver that can be their franchise driver, as you've described it in the past, but that might put them in a position to have two if Piastri develops as hoped. And I think that's really important. I like teams that try and have a very, very strong driver lineups and then hopefully can manage any tensions between them. That puts them in a really good position. It can be hugely beneficial when you're in a proper World Championship fight, as McLaren conceivably could be. Maybe not this year, but in the seasons beyond that, certainly within the range of their current drivers' contracts. So, yeah, very very positive, I think, for that whole team, and just it's a big validation for everything they're doing. I think that they've managed to get Norris and Piastri, in fact, so keen on staying for the long term.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, how to get 30, how to get 20, 20, 20, how to get 20, 20, how to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Well, let's move on to Ferrari and Charles Leclerc now, Scott. Obviously, his deal was pretty widely telegraphed. We've been talking about it as if it's done because it was done sometime at the back end of last year, but it is now announced. What do we officially know about the length of this deal? We referred to 29 earlier, so what approach have Ferrari taken, and what does this mean for the driver market?
Yes, I hinted at this earlier. Same as McLaren. Part of me wonders if McLaren was actually inspired in any way by seeing that Ferrari didn't disclose it. But yeah, Ferrari didn't say the length of Leclerc's deal. There was a quote from Leclerc in their announcement where he says He's looking forward to being there for several more seasons, I think was the phrase that he used. So gives it away that it's several more seasons. Several usually means more than 2. So it's at least a 3-year deal. Again, my theory from earlier, he did a 5-year deal last time. You remember it was at the end of 2019, the end of his first year with Ferrari, new deals that covered 20, 21, 22, 23 and 2024. There's your 5 years. I don't imagine he's done another 5-year deal, because if he had, I'm sure Ferrari would be telling us. Because getting Leclerc on a 5-year deal 1 year into the Fred Vasseur era, having rebuilt almost Leclerc's faith in that project, I think the Mattia Binotto period by the end of 2022 had done a bit of damage, and I don't think their relationship was very good, but it must have also eroded some of the luster that Leclerc held Ferrari in. If you've got a 5-year deal in the pocket with him at the end of that, I'm sure you're telling the world that. I'm absolutely convinced.
But could you not apply the same logic to this situation as you did with the Norris contract? There may be some complicating factors that mean they don't want to be absolute.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's the point I was making earlier, and that's what I'm saying here. I think if they'd done a straight 5-year deal,
I see. Yeah.
they'd be telling us. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a way for him to get to 5 years in this current deal. It could be 3+2. It could be 5 with a break clause. And I'm sure in the fullness of time we will know what he currently has. I think we might get to the end of pre-season testing and have a pretty good idea from some paddock gossip what Norris and Leclerc are doing contractually. Like I said earlier, I do find it a bit disappointing that there isn't that transparency, but that is what it is. The knock-on implications are very clear, aren't they? It's okay. Well, Leclerc's got a new deal. Why haven't they announced Carlos Sainz? And
because he hasn't got a deal.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only. They're not playing games. They're not just trying to space it out. If they had both drivers signed, sealed, and delivered, they'd be saying both drivers signed, sealed, and delivered. And to me, this can only mean that there's an impasse of some kind. And remember, it was Sainz, not Leclerc, who wanted to have his future wrapped up. Leclerc kind of didn't care. Sainz explicitly wanted it done before the start of this season, didn't he? Yeah, so yeah. I think he even wanted it by the end of last year.
Yeah, and Ferrari have made public noises about wanting to get them both tied down, and some people have said that they want to get rid of Sainz, but I don't think that's the case. I think Ferrari are keen to keep Sainz. Sainz wants to stay there, but it's all a question of duration, isn't it? Sainz knows that he wants a decent, long-term, properly lucrative deal, and I think the length is more important almost than the lucrative side, but I'm sure he wants both, and he's a Grand Prix winning driver, so that's legitimate. So it's a question of that game of brinkmanship, isn't it? Does Sainz just sort of at some point say, oh, well, I'll take another whatever at Ferrari, even if it's just a 1+1 or something, when he wants probably a 2+1? I think he'd probably want even longer with Ferrari, but he's not going to get a deal to 2029. That would be asking too much, I think. So it's a very interesting scenario because you've got Sainz in this position where we know he's looking around. We know Sauber likes him. There's other teams he's sort of taken a look at because that's part of the job of a driver who's out of contract. You need to look at alternative options that could work in both as destinations and as leverage. So interesting scenario for Sainz because Ferrari might be sat back thinking, well, we're happy to keep you for something that's not as long-term as you want. We don't think your position's strong enough to say no to that, so we'll just sit and wait for a little bit. Put some pressure on you to sign on the dotted line. That seems to be where the situation's at. It's really interesting. I don't know where the breaking point in that impasse will actually end up being, but it could go both ways. I was pretty confident Sainz would stay on the Predicting the Driver Market for 25 podcast, but this maybe slightly erodes that confidence. I still think Ferrari should keep him if they can. I still think Sainz should stay there, as we know he wants to, but very, very interesting scenario.
It is interesting, and I agree with you that the confidence that Sainz stays there has dwindled in, I would say, over the last few months. And I also agree with you that I do think a renewal is what both sides want. But it's that you've got these, in the Venn diagram, you've got one side is how long Sainz wants to be at Ferrari. The other side is how long Ferrari wants to be with Sainz, and it's whether or not they can cross over at all. Because if Ferrari genuinely only wants him for 1 year because it's got eyes on someone else for 2026 or because it's not 100% convinced and wants to see something extra from Sainz, I don't really see the point in keeping him because It's not the same because he's not the same driver as Fernando Alonso, but it just feels a little bit like when Alpine only wanted to offer Alonso a 1+1. Now that was age related. That was because they were worried that Alonso would deteriorate, which was just the concern of someone who does not understand sport and clearly didn't understand the person that they had within their organisation, which is Lauren Rossi. Ferrari, if you think Sainz is your driver, to your deal. There's no reason not to. If you have question marks over him, so much so that you're only willing to offer him 1 year, just don't. Just find someone else, because Alex Albon, and I said this on that podcast that we did, I think Alex Albon is the perfect option for Ferrari, because he's young. He is young, even though he doesn't consider himself a young F1 driver, and I know what he means by that. He's got plenty of years ahead of him. He's still got room to improve, but he is clearly peaking as a driver versus what we've seen from him before in Formula One. He has history working with Leclerc. They were teammates, I think, and title rivals in GP3. He's a wonderful person to work with because he's a lovely person outside of the car, but he's an incredibly hard and diligent worker as well. I think he has grown and matured as a driver technically and intellectually in that year that he had as Red Bull's reserve driver. I think that did the world of good for him when you consider that 2019 and 2020 was so whirlwind for him. Half a season as a rookie at Toro Rosso, then thrown into the Red Bull for half a season. Then he has the COVID year at Red Bull. So you have pre-season testing, then a massive gap, and then this quick-fire run of awkward races, some on circuits you don't know, just this very difficult kind of period to go through where he was struggling with the car as well and just had no time to digest. And I think that year out gave him a lot of not just perspective, but just opportunity to understand himself as a driver and the car that he had been driving. And I think he knew that if he had the 2020 Red Bull again, he'd do a better job. If he was in the 2021 Red Bull, he was very confident he'd be closer to Verstappen than Perez was. And since he's been at Williams, he's just shown himself capable of rising to the occasion as a team leader. He hasn't wilted under pressure. I think the Melbourne crashing out in a good position there is the only time I can think of him throwing something away at Williams. He is tailor-made to be given an opportunity again in a bigger team, tailor-made for what Ferrari wants, I think, from Leclerc's teammate. So if you don't think that Sainz can cut it for more than a year, or if that's the reason, if that's the hold-up, just pick Albon. But maybe they want to offer Sainz a 2+1, and it's Sainz who's the holdout, and he's demanding 3 years or more. I mean, I don't think that's the case, but it feels a lot like Ferrari saying one thing and then doing something a little bit different behind the scenes.
Yeah, I would have thought Sainz is realistic, but ultimately we know that Audi/Sauber/Stake, whatever we call it, because obviously this is for the future, so it's really with an eye on when it becomes the Audi works team that gives that team its appeal. But they could be offering Sainz big money and a very long-term deal. He can probably pretty much name his contract length for there because they desperately need a driver of his sort of calibre, and obviously it's not super appealing. So there's a little bit to balance up there. But I must admit, I still think the value of staying on at Ferrari vastly exceeds the value of a long-term deal with a team that's still got quite a lot to prove in terms of being able to be winning races in F1. So it's tricky for Sainz. I can't believe he'll be overplaying his hand so much that he wants a super long-term deal. But my best guess will be that it's in that area of, is it a shorter-term one or a medium-term one, if we want to say a 2+1 is a medium term. So very interesting situation. And I'm fascinated to see who breaks there, because like you say, the Albon option, the Albon alternative gives Ferrari just a great choice there, because I can't see Albon's future being sorted out in the next few months. Let's say he'll have to wait a bit. The only scenario in which Albon's future wouldn't be set is if Ferrari were to sign him, because that's the kind of plum drive that will be available unless something unexpected like Red Bull taking an interest. So yeah, really, really interesting. And Sainz is a sharp operator, and he'll think about all those other elements, the commercial side of it, what it sets him up for in life, etc., etc. But yeah, it's a really big deal. So I'm fascinated to see where it goes. And yeah, as we said, the The fact the Leclerc deal is now formalised, I suspect Ferrari quite like the idea of announcing them both. And I think Vasseur did refer to wanting to get both the drivers sorted before the season started when he talked about it in December. So a bit of an impasse, combined with the fact that McLaren option's a bit weaker as just a little future possibility for Sainz, just shifts things around a bit. So I'm fascinated to know what Carlos Sainz is thinking. But are you thinking that your proposal on the podcast we did a few weeks ago, predicting the driver market, where you argued eloquently that it was going to be Leclerc Albon at Ferrari, and me and Ben kind of disagreed with you and we stuck with Sainz, do you think you might be looking extra smug and you might restore your reputation in terms of driver market?
I was just about to say,
after the Alonso Farrago.
I was just about to say, this is going to be this is the counterweight to Alonso Hungary to 2022. This is going to give me a little bit of credibility back. So good, excellent. It's the World 117, me 1, if this comes off and I'm correct.
The comeback begins. That's what it's all about. But yes,
but what a one!
Well, exactly, yeah. But it's an interesting set of moves in the driver market. It's all a complicated picture that's always shifting and always evolving. Still lots of intrigue in the 2025 driver market, particularly. But that Norris deal in particular that's just been announced. Perhaps an unexpected tick in a box early on. Well, thanks very much, Scott, for your insight. Head to therace.com. Don't forget the hyphen. Plenty to read there about Norris's McLaren deal and the rest of goings on in the F1 world. Check out our other podcasts covering Formula E, IndyCar and MotoGP, and also have a listen to the Race F1 Tech Show with the legendary Gary Anderson, and have a look at our videos on YouTube as well. There's plenty for you to watch there. Well, we're going to brace ourselves for the next bombshell in the driver market, whenever that will be. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.